All right, hello and welcome to this Frostclaw Runemaster guide updated. So this is the second version, I guess you could say, of this build. We released it at 0.9.2. Since then, I've been playing it a lot and have come up with some improvements to it. So this is going to include those improvements along with gameplay footage, which we couldn't have at the very launch of the patch. So now both of those things are in. It's a better build, and you have a better idea of what you're playing. So as you can see on the footage here, it does very good damage, both single target and clear. It's very tanky. It's not the best at anything, but it is good at everything. This is a build that is well-rounded. It's nice and balanced, so you shouldn't have any issues in any particular area of the game. So some of the big changes to this build right now, the biggest change is we've added Bleeding Heart. Bleeding Heart is a very good way to leech health, which this build needs because it is running Twisted Heart of Okairos, which is going to convert your current health into ward when you cast an elemental spell. And to continue to do that, it needs to regenerate that health, and we're going to do that through leech. One of the ways that we're going to do that, primary way really, is going to be through Bleeding Heart. Now, this wasn't on the build originally, and that's because Bleeding Heart usually isn't on spell-based builds, because every time you cast a spell, it bleeds you. It puts a bleed stack on you. Well, fortunately, Frostclaw also has the ability to, cleanse these bleeds. So this is a scenario where you can actually run Bleeding Heart with a spell-based build, especially a spammy build, because we'll never get over one bleed anyway, since every time we put him on, Frostclaw is going to cleanse him off. So we've added that. It's a huge improvement to the build. It makes sustain far stronger, along with the blessing. We get plenty of leech, and it allows us to easily get well into the thousands of leech, even with not amazing gear. We're talking like 6,000-7,000 is very doable, and that's without amazing gear. You can get much more when you have really good gear and a lot of health. Okay, so let's go ahead and get into the pros and cons of this build. It has strong CC. That's mostly through the freeze that it offers, because there's a freeze rate built into Frostclaw, and also the other skills we're using. We're using 3 different skills to do damage. All of them have a freeze rate. So even though we're not building into freeze, we're going to freeze a lot. So that's good CC for the build. It's very tanky. It is also starter friendly. It doesn't require a lot of gear to get going. It wants Twisted Heart, but that is a very target farmable item. And then Bleeding Heart is a very common drop, so it shouldn't take much to get either of these. And it has solid clear and single target damage. It's not going to blow you away with amazing damage compared to some builds, but it is good. It's very much within the realm of more than acceptable. It will clear things with relative ease, so it's solid there. As far as negatives go, it can be mana intensive. Don't let this scare you too much, but you will at some point run out of mana, even if you have a lot of mana and mana regen, because you'll just get quote unquote lucky with your procs. It's a proc based build, and every proc does cost mana, and that will come back sometimes to just put you in negative mana. It's not a huge issue. It just means you won't be able to cast some skills for a short period of time. But Frostclaw doesn't cost any mana, so it's not really that big of a deal. It happens to me still quite a bit, but not all that often, and when it does, again, it's pretty easy to recover from it. It is not the fastest farmer. This is only sort of a negative. It's not a build that's specifically designed for farming. Being a well-rounded build, it's not pushing for speed in particular. It is fairly fast. It's just not going to compete with the most efficient farming builds that are meant for that in the game. It is not top tiered anything. Like we talked about, it's a well-balanced build, but it doesn't really stand out as like the best of anything. This is true of most builds. So this isn't like a huge negative, but it is the case if you're looking for like a bosser, or specifically, or like a farmer, like we're talking about. This isn't going to be the best at those things. It can do all of those things, but it won't be this. So this is for a well-rounded build if you're looking for something that can do everything. It also has a Flame Ward uptime management between Flame Ward and Frost Wall that you will want to manage, because of for one, Flame Ward has better it costs less mana, so it's better when you cast that over Frost Wall. But because of Frost Wall, we can cast Flame Ward whenever we want with no cooldown because of a node that's in it. So this allows us to have permanent Flame Ward, but that will cause you to have to manage that that uptime on it, and also the rotation between those two. Okay, let's go ahead and go from here into the skills and the passives. All right, so as far as these skills and passives go, we're going to start with Frostclaw, which is kind of like the big part of the entire build. It's going to be proccing Elemental Nova, as well as Ice Barrage. Elemental Nova is a clear skill for us, and Ice Barrage is more of a single target. So having both these together gives us that balanced damage that we want. So this is a very important interaction that really defines the entire build. It also has really nice synergy with Ice Barrage beyond just the procs, because it gives it a higher rate of fire, which is just a nice, even additional amount of damage on top of what you normally get. Frost Wall is playing a primary role of allowing us to cast Flame Ward whenever we want to. It does increase the mana consumption, but we can handle that. But it also gives us a couple of other benefits, particularly that it freezes enemies that run in or come into contact with it, which is really nice because it gives us a lot more control, a lot more CC. It also does have a cleanse in it, and it does have we do have it set up to do lower mana cost, and there is a frenzy haste built into here as well. So you won't get a ton out of this if you use this quickly after casting it, but if you wait a few seconds, you can get even more. Frenzy in particular, as we do have Flame Ward set to give us haste as well, so we have multiple pathways to getting haste. Flame Ward itself, as we were talking about, we do have haste built into it. This is an offensive setup. It still has very good defense because we still are taking barrier, which is 40% less hit damage, and we get 30% less damage built in. But we are building primarily for offense in this particular setup, and for speed with Flame Runner, with Infusion, and with Through Flames, and then converting those to cold, so we have permanent 250% increased cold damage, another 8%, or excuse me, another +8 added cold damage. So there is a way to set this up for more for defense. It's in the alternative skills and tips if you want to do that. But for most content, this will probably be the best way to go because it's more efficient. You'll clear faster, and you'll do more damage. As far as Ice Barrage is the big single target setup, we have this set up for maximum multipliers, also for more global cold damage, which is just awesome for everything that we do. Everything gets 60% more damage thanks to this whenever frost armor goes up. We also have we also have Ice Shield, which gives us a protection against projectiles and anything that Ice Barrage is facing and the shield is facing. If we get projectiles coming in, they will be negated, so that's pretty strong. And then the rest of this is all set up for damage, for fire rate, and it's especially set up for bossing. Challenge elements is really for bosses. Yeah, so all for damage plus those little extra benefits, or big extra benefits in Frost Armor's case, because that more global damage is really big. Also, the cold damage taken here is nice and useful, especially for this build, because Elemental Nova is going to cause us to take 12% more cold damage. So this basically negates that with a minus 20% cold damage. Speaking of Elemental Nova, this is also set up for damage, but for clear. So we have the Shatter Nova node, which is just excellent because those are 30% multipliers if we have all of those, and we should get all 4 of these if we gear properly. And then we have more damage also through Glacial Might. Cryomantic Fragility is set up for lower mana cost so that we can, handle a lot of procs on this. And Arcana Elementorum, some of these are hard to say, is another damage and area multiplier. Okay, moving on to the passives. So this is set up with a strong push into Runemaster, because Runemaster is frankly just so good. The big nodes here, Transcendence with a ward per second and the health, are both really good for us. Mental Catalysis takes out basically half of the damage we take from crits alone. We get a couple of fixes on our gear, and we can become effectively crit immune. Inscribed Instruments is 72% crit multi, which is huge because we're going to use a wand. We also get a nice bit of cast speed and move speed from Rune of Dilation. We get damage reduction from Sphere of Protection. And we get some good crit here from Runeward Cataclysm. We're taking a lot of intelligence here because it's just really strong for the build in a number of different ways, including because we're going to have Calculated Destruction, where we gain 3% spell crit per intelligence. That's going to help us cap our crits. We're also taking Arcane Momentum and the Essence of Celerity that goes along with it for both move speed, spell damage, and cast speed. All right, let's move on. Let's talk about the skill usage and rotation. There's one thing here I'm going to talk about that's going to be slightly different that I'm actually going to alter in the on the actual Maxroll guide. In here, I tell you to alternate between Frostwall and Flame Ward. The reality is, for most people, you won't be able to just do Frostwall, Flame Ward, Frostwall, Flame Ward, Frostwall, Flame Ward. You're going to have to probably do like 2 Frostwalls back to back and then Flame Ward. So really, the rotation is when Flame Ward is up, you can use it. Otherwise, use Frostwall. For the rest of the rotation, it's pretty simple. You're going to spam Frostclaw to deal damage to enemies. That's going to be pretty much just how you deal damage. And you're going to use as much as you can without avoiding having your Flame Ward up 100% of the time, or almost 100% of the time, because that's going to be both a damage and damage reduction boost. That's huge. So that's going to be your primary thing that you're going to pay attention to, is making sure Flame Ward's always up. So Frost Wall, if you're using that, then you have to walk through it, no problem. And then if Flame Ward is up, you use that instead. You don't have to walk through it. As far as the rest of it, it's really just use teleport to position yourself or to move across the battlefield more quickly. And on bossing, you will want to manually cast Ice Barrage at the start of the fight, or after long periods of DPS downtime, like if you're avoiding a really big telegraphed attack, because it's just going to significantly increase your DPS to have Ice Barrage up. All right, moving on to the gear, blessings, and idols section. So we're going to go to endgame gear. Starting gear and advanced gear is really just trying to get you to that position. Endgame gear is where it starts to really come together. We talked about Twisted Heart of Ukairos. Ukairos is a huge part of your build as far as defense goes. The increased health is in here as well. 20% is huge. Increased cast speed is nice, and strength is actually good for armor. And then we get the +1 to spells. This is just all around very good item. And then Bleeding Heart is going to be a huge synergy with Twisted Heart, along with your Grand Hunger of the Void Blessing for spell damage leech. It is relatively easy to get Bleeding Heart with at least +1 legendary power, but even 2 is fairly reasonable. So we're going to be able to put some stuff on that and not be completely missing out on the stats we normally get from Amulet. In this case, we're going to have Crit Multi and Shred Armor if we can. Shred Armor is probably going to be ideal here because you still want Frailty somewhere. So either Shred Armor or Frailty on your Amulet, and then whichever one you don't get, put it on your gloves. Ideally, you'll have Shred Armor up here because you can then get a tier 6 on it versus not having your tier 6 hybrid health here if you were to do it there. But either way, it's going to be pretty solid. We're going to be using a Crystal Wand. We're choosing this one over the Cast Speed Wand because it gives us mana, and if we get 300%, or excuse me, not 300%, 300 mana, we're going to get double the effect of the spell crit on both our body armor and our helmet, as well as on our idol. We'll get the double. It's actually the wrong fix, so I'll fix that. This should be the cold damage doubled if you have 300 more mana. So between those, getting the mana is more worthwhile. So we're going to push for 300 mana, which also smooths out the rotation itself. Even though we have a good bit of mana regen built in here, it still helps to have that like layer of protection of, like, if we get a good bit of RNG, we still have mana. There's still going to be times where we run out, but at least we'll run out a lot less if we're at 300 plus mana. As far as priority stats, we're looking at cast speed as being a huge one. Crit strike chance up to being capped. Crit multi to go along with that. On the offense, intelligence is also a huge priority stat, maybe even more so than the other ones, but fortunately they don't really compete, so it's not a problem. Health is a priority stat for sure. Mana regen is also a priority stat because you're going to want it to smooth out the rotation. But health is actually how we build our ward with Twisted Heart, so we want to stack that as much as we can. The other priority stat is reduced bonus damage taken from critical strikes and armor hybrid. You're going to want to get a tier 5 on your body armor, and if you can seal it on your boots, great. Otherwise, you should probably prioritize it over the cooldown recovery speed on the boots and just put it in your suffix slot. All right, this is going to look very much like endgame, just with, better. So you're pretty much going to be the same there. As far as blessings go, we talked about Grand Hunger of the Void. This is a very important one and the first one you should farm. Then we're going to be looking at after that, Grand Resolve of Humanity for the all resistance, which will help you cap your resistances. It's very strong for that. The offensive one, the first offensive one, is going to be Grand Rage of Winter. This is for Cold Shred. This is 20% damage multiplier on bosses and even more so on non-bosses. So this is a very powerful option. You can also do the increased armor here if you don't want the extra damage. That's a perfectly fine choice. Grand Body of Obsidian for the armor, 320 up to 320 armor is pretty significant. This is pretty sizable. And then the last one we have is Grand Might of the Sea Titan for the increased cold damage. If you want to go defense on this one, you can go ward per second. That's also an option. All right. Idols, as far as idols go, we already talked about this should actually be a cold damage 300, doubled for 300 mana. The stun immunity after using teleport is really good. Thorn of Ambition is huge for this build. It's 40% more damage on bosses and 40% more armor on bosses. We definitely want this in the build 100%. Hybrid, or not hybrid, but double health idols are really strong because as we talked about, stacking health is very important for this build. If you can fit them in, put resistances elsewhere, and if you need resistances here, you can do that as well. But the ultimate goal is to put health idols in there. All right. As far as build scaling endgame, we've covered most of the things that are going to be in here, but just a quick rundown on some of the things that you can look at. Cooldown reduction is not a super priority stat, but it's nice, especially for teleport, but also for Remanial Cast Flame Ward to give you more mana efficiency. Cast speed is very important for the build. We talked about the Crystal Wand over Dragonhorn. That's going to be for the spell crits and the cold damage doubled if you have 300 more. Crystal Skull is absolutely necessary in this build, or at least a base spell crit strike catalyst. You cannot use a non-spell crit strike catalyst on this one. You won't be able to cap your crit. This is very important. Crystal Skull is the best one of the bunch. As far as defense goes, we already talked about Twisted Heart of Kairos, but we go into more detail here. What makes it so good and why you want Grin Hugger and Bleeding Heart. So important stuff. Health, very important. Chill and Frailty are on every build. This is no different. There is some stun in here, which is pretty nice. We also talked about the stun immunity on the Arcane Idols, or the Arcane Idol, a huge Arcane Idol. Yeah, that covers it. There's some armor stuff in here as well. Armor is good. We're not super prioritizing armor, but we can get a decent amount in this build, and we want to. Okay, as far as recommended endgame activities, we can basically summarize this as it can do everything. There's nothing it can't do. It can do tier 4 dungeons, especially with the amount of defense and ward it can build up. It can definitely do those. It can handle everything in the monolith, and it can run the arena. Don't know exactly how high it can go in the arena, but based upon the way it's set up, it should be able to do pretty well. The only question is, can it do enough damage at the higher levels to not get overwhelmed? But as far as tankiness, it's very strong there. All right, the last thing that we'll mention is that there is a loot filter set up already for it, so feel free to go ahead and download that. It's designed the way that all the Maxroll ones are, which is set up to be as consistent with the regular game and the way the colors are and the way that things drop as possible, while still keying you in on the really important stuff. So this is a loot filter that we've set up, and we feel really good about where it is, and we think players will really benefit from it. All right, thank you so much for watching this guide. If you have any questions, feel free to ask me in the comments or in my Discord, but also please do check over the written guide. There's a lot of details in there. We didn't cover everything. There's plenty of stuff in there to help out if you feel like you need some more information than what this video guide has given you. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a great time on Last Epoch. I hope you enjoy this build, and I'll see you all again real soon.